Strasbourg, in the summer of 1518, was a city caught in a storm of crises. Though known as a thriving trade hub within the Holy Roman Empire, its people were far from secure. The previous year's harvest had failed, driving grain prices to unbearable levels. Many families survived on scraps of rye bread so rough and poorly stored that it often carried molds and fungi. Famine gnawed at the city's poor, leaving them weakened, desperate, and sickly. But hunger was only one of the city's troubles. Strasbourg was still recovering from waves of disease, outbreaks that killed without discrimination, tearing through both rich and poor households alike. Medicine, as we understand it, didn't exist. Doctors still relied on theories of imbalanced humors and treatments that bled patients or starved them further. Fear of the plague, of pestilence, and of spiritual punishment was woven into daily life. Religion was not simply a matter of private belief. It dictated every thought and action. People saw natural disasters, floods, famine, and epidemics as punishments for sin. God, saints, and demons were ever-present forces, watching and intervening in the affairs of mortals. Strasbourg's towering cathedral cast a literal and symbolic shadow across the city, reminding its citizens daily that their salvation or damnation was at stake. Add to this the social tensions simmering under the surface. Political power struggles between the church, the city council, and guild leaders made the atmosphere tense and unstable. The poor bore the brunt of taxes and debts, while the wealthy elites lived comfortably. This contrast created resentment and despair. So when the first signs of the strange epidemic appeared, Strasbourg was primed to believe that something supernatural, perhaps divine punishment or demonic affliction, had arrived. A city already pushed to its breaking point was about to witness one of the strangest events in recorded history. An outbreak not of plague or fever, but of uncontrollable, relentless dance. The story of the dancing plague of 1518 begins with one woman. In mid-July, under the blazing sun, a woman named Frau Trophia stepped out into a narrow Strasbourg street and began to dance. At first, it must have looked strange but harmless. Perhaps she was celebrating, mocking, or even entertaining neighbors. But witnesses quickly realized something was very wrong. Frau Trophia wasn't smiling. She wasn't moving to music. She seemed compelled, her body jerking in rhythm that had no rhythm, her face twisted with strain. She danced for hours, long after exhaustion should have brought her to the ground. Onlookers whispered. Some thought she was cursed. Others suspected madness. And yet, she did not stop. By the next day, she was still moving, her body trembling, soaked in sweat, her feet raw against the cobblestones. She collapsed, only to rise again and continue. Within days, others joined her not by choice, but as if seized by the same invisible force. First a handful, then dozens, until whole groups swayed, spun, and collapsed in the streets, only to rise again in torment. What terrified the people of Strasbourg wasn't just the spectacle, but the lack of explanation. No music, no celebration, no festivity, just ordinary citizens, suddenly unable to stop moving. These weren't graceful dancers. Their bodies thrashed, stumbled, and shook. Their expressions were of pain, not joy. And yet the compulsion was stronger than hunger, fatigue, or reason. By the end of the first week, more than 30 people had joined Frau Trophia in the streets. They danced in the market squares, in alleys, in front of the cathedral. The city buzzed with rumors. Was this a punishment from God? Had a saint, angered by sin, cursed the town? Or was it witchcraft? Whatever the cause, the people of Strasbourg realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, something that turned ordinary human bodies into puppets of chaos. The authorities, instead of stopping it, began to panic. Doctors were summoned. Priests whispered prayers. Crowds gathered around the dancers, both fascinated and horrified. And the madness had only just begun. What began with one woman soon spiraled into chaos. By late July, Strasbourg streets were overrun with dancers. Dozens became hundreds. Estimates vary, but chroniclers of the time claimed as many as 400 people were caught in the grip of the plague, swaying and stumbling night and day. It was no longer an oddity, it was a full-scale crisis. The scenes must have been nightmarish. Entire groups, men and women, the young and old, were swept into an unstoppable rhythm. They collapsed from exhaustion, only to wake and rise again, compelled to move. Their feet bled, their limbs shook, their faces twisted with pain. Some screamed in agony as their muscles tore, others prayed between spasms, but still the dance continued. The city's narrow streets, once bustling with trade and gossip, became arenas of suffering. Passers-by had to step over dancers writhing on the ground. The market squares filled not with merchants' voices, but with the sound of shuffling feet, sobs, and the gasps of the dying. And yes, people died. Contemporary accounts tell us that some dancers succumbed to heart attacks, strokes, or sheer exhaustion. Imagine moving without pause for days, your body refusing to rest. For some, the strain proved too great. Death itself became the only release. The crowd, instead of diminishing, grew. More and more were caught up, as if the compulsion spread like a contagion. Was it physical? Was it spiritual? To the terrified townsfolk, it seemed as if Strasbourg was cursed. What made matters worse was the growing audience. Citizens gathered around the afflicted as if watching a grim performance. Some came out of fear, others out of fascination. For the poor, who had little entertainment, this strange spectacle became both horrifying and irresistible. The dancing plague was no longer just an epidemic. It was a communal event, a grotesque mirror of festival and ritual. City officials were overwhelmed. Priests warned of divine punishment. Doctors muttered about hot blood and imbalances of humors. No one had an answer. And while the authorities debated, the dancers kept moving, as if mocking all attempts at explanation. Strasbourg, in the heat of 1518, was trapped in a living nightmare. By August of 1518, Strasbourg was in full panic. Hundreds of people were now caught in the grip of the strange affliction. The city council could no longer ignore the outbreak. Merchants complained the markets were unusable, families wept for loved ones who would not stop moving, and the reputation of Strasbourg itself was under threat. Officials met to decide what to do about the strange plague of dance. First, they turned to doctors. Medical knowledge at the time was deeply rooted in the theories of Galen, an ancient physician whose writings still guided European medicine. The Strasbourg doctors inspected the dancers and declared the cause to be an excess of hot blood. In their view, the sufferers were literally overheated, their blood boiling with energy that had to be released through movement. To us, this sounds absurd, but to them, it was logical. The cure for hot blood was not rest, but more motion. If the dancers could exhaust themselves, they might finally be freed. Taking this advice, the city council made a decision that would go down in history for its irony. They ordered the construction of stages and guild halls where the afflicted could dance more freely. Musicians were hired, and professional dancers were brought in to accompany the plague victims. Imagine it. People collapsing from exhaustion, yet the authorities surrounding them with fiddles, drums, and pipes, encouraging the madness to continue. Instead of solving the problem, the policy fanned the flames. The music amplified the frenzy. What was once spontaneous became orchestrated chaos. But medicine was only one path. Religion offered another. Priests declared that the plague was the punishment of Saint Vitus, a patron saint often associated with epilepsy, nervous disorders, and strange compulsions. Pilgrimages were organized to shrines dedicated to him. Some victims were even carried to chapels, where priests performed rituals of purification and offered holy water. Others were made to wear red shoes, a color linked symbolically to the saint. Yet even these spiritual remedies did not bring immediate relief. The city's response reveals something striking about the mindset of the time. They were caught between science and faith, between Galen's theories and the wrath of saints. Both approaches failed. The dancers kept dancing. The suffering deepened. The authorities grew desperate. What had started as a medical mystery was now a civic disaster, and it seemed Strasbourg might collapse under the weight of its own nightmare. Eventually, the relentless dancing began to subside. Some survivors were said to have been taken to the shrine of Saint Vitus, sprinkled with holy water and prayed over by priests. Music was banned from public spaces, stages dismantled, and weddings postponed to avoid further contagion. Strasbourg slowly returned to its routines. But the event left an indelible mark on the city and on history. Chroniclers recorded the epidemic in detail, and it became a puzzle that has fascinated historians for centuries. The big question remains, what really caused it? The people of 1518 believed in curses, divine punishment, and the will of saints. But modern science has proposed several possibilities. Mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria, is one strong candidate. Extreme stress, famine, and fear could have created a psychological environment in which people unconsciously compelled each other to dance. The human brain is susceptible to suggestion, especially in tightly knit communities living under immense pressure. Another theory involves ergot poisoning. Rye contaminated with ergot fungus produces compounds similar to LSD, causing hallucinations, convulsions, and spasms. Eating contaminated bread could have induced bizarre and uncontrollable movements in multiple people simultaneously. Some historians argue this might explain the dancing, but critics note that ergot poisoning typically produces vomiting, gangrene, and delirium, symptoms not consistently described in the records. Other explanations have been proposed, including neurological disorders, epileptic fits, or even forms of social protest. Could citizens have been expressing frustration at crushing taxes and relentless hardship in a way disguised as involuntary dancing? It's possible, though no evidence confirms this hypothesis. Most likely, the event resulted from a complex combination of physical, psychological, and cultural factors, a perfect storm that humanity rarely experiences. The legacy of the dancing plague is not confined to history books. Even today, mass psychogenic illness occurs. Schools, offices, and factories occasionally report sudden outbreaks of fainting, twitching, or convulsions with no identifiable physical cause. In the modern world, the contagion may spread through social networks, digital media, or global panic, a reminder that the mind remains as vulnerable now as it was 5 centuries ago. Strasbourg's dancers, moving helplessly in the summer of 1518, offer a stark testament to how stress, belief, and environment can merge into extraordinary human behavior. The story reminds us that history is not only battles and kings. Sometimes it is ordinary people caught in forces far beyond their control, dancing against their will in the shadow of death. A haunting reflection of the fragility of the human mind.